Dr. Paul Davidson, who is a member of our board and also president of the medical staff at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. Dr. Davidson. And I apologize if any other board members snuck in and I didn't see you, but since I'm retiring soon, you can't do anything to me. Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to recognize Governor Andrew Cuomo, Senator Joe Griffo, and Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi, who worked to secure the $300 million state funding grant required for this project. Without that money, quite frankly, we would not be standing here today. Additionally, I would like to recognize the New York State Department of Health Deputy Commissioner Dan Shepard, and Dan's with us. Dan, thank you very much. Dan has spearheaded the health department's interaction with Mohawk Valley Health System, and having done this working with DOH for, I guess, now almost 40 years in New York State, it's the smoothest discussion we've ever had with the Department of Health. So Dan, thank you very much for your leadership. I would also like to recognize our partners in this project, Oneida County and the Oneida County Executive, Anthony J. Pacenti Jr. Utica Mayor Robert Palmieri. And Alicia Dix, President and CEO of the Community Foundation of Herkimer and Oneida County. They have all been instrumental in the development of this project, and I appreciate their continued support, friendship, and mentorship to help move this project forward. I would also like to thank Mohawk Valley Edge, and I know Dave Benjamin, chairman of the board, is here, as well as Steve DeMaio. I saw both of them. Thank you. The Greater Utica Chamber of Commerce and the Genesis Group for being supporters from the beginning of this project. It's truly very, very appreciated. Thank you. And to the many elected officials who have been proponents of this project, and the businesses and individuals who have been constant support throughout the process, telling us to make sure that we kept the course on this and not to be deterred. Many of you are here today, and I want to thank you personally for all your support throughout the project so far. Now, I'd like to introduce Bob Schofield, who is the Executive Vice President, and Ryan Hollinger, who is one of the partners and principals at NVBJ, who will actually do the presentation today. Bob is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for our system, and has taken the lead in this project from our system perspective, working tirelessly, literally day in and day out, to get us to where we are today on this. And Ryan is the principal, as I said, and his vision and expertise have been extraordinary in taking what is discussed in the many meetings, and the two of them will talk about that a little bit, and trying to bring that together to what is really, we think, going to be a fantastic new facility and campus for this entire region. And so with that, I'd like to have Bob and Ryan come up and do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I just want to echo the thank you for everyone that came today. A lot of faces in this room that actually are making this process possible. Members of our medical staff, members of our staff, members of the team that we got called upon to give us the advice and input we need to build this facility in downtown Utica. So let's go to the agenda. I want to talk a little bit about the project milestones. I'll bring you up to speed how we got to where we are. In 2014, we began to explore this concept of building a new hospital. It was not something that we took lightly. It certainly wasn't something that only took a couple of minutes to make that determination. But through the process of grants that were available through the state of New York, we opted to discuss with the state of New York, will there be money available for us to build this project? And lo and behold, in January 2015, through the governor's proposal for healthcare dollars, $300 million was put into the budget for a creation of an integrated healthcare delivery system for Oneida County. In April of that year, it officially made it into the budget, and then March of 2016, it was approved. So it was in September of 2015, we announced its location, which is what we'll be discussing here today. And in November of 2016, we received the request for application. So not only did we get this legislation put in, but we had to apply for the dollars. It wasn't just handed to us. and completed a rather large 200-page document that needed to be completed. But we think it made a very good justification why this community deserves this facility. In January of 2017, we submitted that RFA to the state, and in April of 17, we received approval that our grant dollars were going to come to Oneida County for this project. In May, we started engaging with Ryan and his team, Turner Construction. Hammes Corporation has been with us right from the beginning as our owner rep, guiding us through this process. So that's when, in earnest, we started having numerous meetings with our staff, our medical staff, to start trying to determine what this facility should look like. As Scott said earlier, we designed it from the inside out. We had to determine what is the best way to build a facility to deliver the optimal patient care in an environment that's best for our employees. So we had over 90 user meetings as of June of 2017 and 100 community meetings just getting input from people on this particular project. We submitted our certificate of need in November of 2017. And we began the permitting process for the SECRA process in January 2018. CON was approved in April. We still work with the Department of Health through that document. Schematic design phase concluded in May. So in other words, we had decided by May what the general shape of the building was going to be, what was going to be located where within the building. Shortly after that, we started doing design development, which is putting the final details on the room-by-room design of the facility within the facility. The fall of this year, we expect the SECRA process to be completed with a hospital construction start date in the last quarter or September or thereabouts of 2019, and we expect to move into this new facility the last quarter of 2022. So a lot has gone into it up to this point, and Ryan's going to show you how we've gotten to where we are and what our plans look like.
Collaborative process. As Bob and Scott have both mentioned, a tremendous amount of work went into the development of the ideas and drivers behind this project. And even early on, a collaborative effort that went into developing this vision statement. The vision is to create an advanced healthcare campus for MPH and accomplish three things. That's what we list here. 1, design that promotes the health of patients. 2, optimizing the work environment for caregivers. And 3, considering this project can have a larger benefit on the community and Utica and even the region itself. So it's like 3 different scales. You start with the individual, the patient, you scale up and think about all the staff and the people who work in the building, understanding that if we provide something that cares for the staff, they provide better care for the patients, and there's trickle down. And then the last scale is that larger Utica and regional aspect. And we believe with this project that we're hitting on all 3. These are some of my favorite slides because they get into the numbers of community meetings and involvement that we've engaged. It's the real proof behind that statement about collaboration. So over 100 community meetings involving over 2,000 community members. And that was external. Those were people who were outside of the hospital. And then inside of the hospital, over 155 user group meetings. Those are different departments. That's talking with physicians, nurses, security staff, all the people who handle operations, and even the people who are moving things around inside of the building. And that staff then is 378 people involved in these meetings to date. And you can see physicians, clinicians, non-clinical technicians, and staff support. Here's what that actually looks like. Photos from those sessions. So process discussion. Very early on, way before we're talking about bricks and mortar and the size of rooms, we're talking about the processes that drive operations in the hospital. And we're thinking about new ways of doing things, new ways of delivering care, lean ways that streamline the way things move through the hospital, the way procedures are accomplished in order to make the building as efficient as possible. Those are the process discussions that we're having. Then we move on to talking about program adjacencies. What departments need to be next to other departments in order to streamline transport and make sure that we have high connectivity and high collaboration with the staff. So here you see the staff actually moving bubbles of departments around on pieces of paper in order to experiment with different relationships from one department to another or even one room to another. Department flows. Here the staff are brought into a user group meeting and they're working with cardboard models to actually begin to lay out different designs for a unit itself, for a department. And everything is iterative and experimentative. So they can try one way, and then there's another team in the same room, and they're working up another option, and then the teams are coming together and talking about the pros and cons of each in order to develop something that works really well. And then lastly, as we continue to scale up the process, mock-up rooms. So this is working in a warehouse where we've set up these large sheets of cardboard to make full-scale mock-ups of many of the rooms, many of the most important building blocks of the project. An ICU room, a typical med-surg room, an exam room, different operating rooms. And all those are built at full scale so that the staff can come in, move the walls around, experiment with different sizes, even bring in the furniture, the equipment, the carts, and experiment with the way the work is going to affect the day-to-day operations in the room. So you can test something out, like what if a patient has a heart attack in the bathroom? Do we have enough room to move all the equipment in quickly and get them out? And that is so much more effective than just working with drawings. So the idea of building these things is a big investment, but it's one that we've made on this project in order to make sure we get it right. This is that collaborative team that was mentioned before. These are all the different consultants, design firms that are coming together to work on this project at the moment. It's been a great effort. Some of them are local, some of them are regional or national. All of them coming together, bringing their best ideas from here locally, and then also ideas internationally even that can apply to this project, streamline the process, and make it a better building. And then community input. Priorities brought forth. So these are the guiding principles. We've worked to summarize them in the next few slides. I'll just touch on a few of them. Augmenting the city vibrancy, that fits into the last line of that mission plan. Ensuring that the parking is as close as possible to the building. You have lots of people coming into this building with mobility issues, and that relationship of parking and connectivity to the doors is extremely important on the hospital, so it's been a big driver for us. Respecting the street grid, that's also an important one. It's easy to do a big building that closes off a lot of streets. We did not want to do that on this project. Instead, we wanted to keep as many streets open as possible, honor the urban fabric of Utica, and allow this building to be a connector rather than a barrier. And then the last few, connecting neighborhoods, that ties into the same thing. We'll show a diagram in a few minutes that gets at all the other activity that's happening around this building in terms of revitalization in Utica. This building is in the center of all that activity. And it's not a barrier, but it's actually something that can tie it all together, physically and economically, as a big economic engine for the community. Benefiting the skyline, that's another one that's really important. Thinking about the size of the building and ensuring that it doesn't dwarf or overshadow other buildings on site, but it has a sensitive relationship to that context and is complementary. So with all of those precepts and drivers that we heard from the community, we worked to move this project forward in terms of how it fit into the site. This is a simple diagram of the site, and it gets at two big ideas for this project. One is that it connects to downtown. We have Genesee Street here. There's a lot of great activity going on, and it plugs in to that urban condition. But then it also has this other side to it, a regional gateway. It's seen from the freeway system, it has a presence on the skyline, and it projects the image of the hospital out into the region as people drive by. So it has these two natures, and it needs to be solved for both. Here's how we began to do that in the site planning in particular. So, the easiest way to begin the conversation about the site is to talk about Lafayette Street. You drive in on Lafayette Street, and here is the main entry to the hospital. So there's a drop-off loop right here. This is where people are coming in, dropping off loved ones, and walking in. And then directly next to that is this parking garage. And as I said before, we want to make sure that the walk from the parking garage is as simple as possible. And also that the garage is very easy to see from that drop-off. So that everyone here who's coming in and often is very stressed, in a vulnerable state, has a very clear understanding of where to go next. The wayfinding for the project is made really clear at the level of the site then. This is the building itself. It's a large rectangular 2-story podium, and then there's a bed tower that rises up above that, and that bed tower is shaped like this. The other really important entries are the emergency department. So that's separated from the main entry in order to avoid any confusion about where to go and when. And you have people driving into that emergency department drop-off from this direction on the site. But the nice thing about the garage being located here is that they also have a very clear and short connection to that garage. They can drop off loved ones and then walk immediately across and over so that they're inside the building via the emergency department entrance. Ambulances come in on this side. They have their own dedicated drop-off that happens here. Those are the three main entrances. And then there's also, over here, the central utility plant. That's a big part of how the hospital works. That's where functions like loading and materials management all happen, with a bridge that connects that utility plant over to this building. The last thing we'll say about the site plan is that in that attempt to keep streets as open and connected as possible, we have Lafayette running this way. Vehicles drive on Lafayette here and here, but we've maintained pedestrian connectivity for Lafayette all the way over to the far side of the site. We're calling this the pedestrian promenade. So that remains open. We didn't have to close that street, and it actually feeds into that desire to have this park-like setting that is connecting rather than creating a barrier. Helipad is over here, and we have nice space on this side of the project for future expansion. We've located in that two-story podium the emergency department and the surgery departments, because those are the departments that are most likely to require expansion in the future, and we're giving them the room to do that. It's always thinking about what's next for the hospital and how to position the building on the site to accommodate that and support it. Now the exterior design process. This is a window into how our team has worked. We're always thinking about multiple options and bringing those forward and getting client input. Here's two different options for thinking about the way the exterior of the building could look. And we're thinking about the whole exterior at this point. It's tempting to think about one thing at a time and just think about that big picture. But actually what we always need to be doing is thinking about the scale of this building in terms of the site and the way it sits on the skyline, but then also multiple other experiences that are tied into the decisions that we're making on the exterior. So here we're simultaneously thinking about two options in terms of the way it looks from a distance, what happens when you get closer to this particular type of wall, and then how that affects one of those really important building blocks on the project, the patient room, and then what it's like to be inside the patient room and look out through that exterior and comparing the different experiences. So this was really valuable. It's thinking about it simultaneously, interior to exterior, and the way that drives the way you enclose the building. And even for this, putting these two options before all of the users and getting input, it became valuable to take the tools to a whole new level, not just thinking about the kinds of renderings that you have here, but actually using VR goggles, which is what we're showing in this scene, where we're able to bring people in and have them look up at the building and experience it from the inside out in a virtual reality environment, which was incredibly valuable for everyone in the process. We also think very carefully about the materials. It's not just about the way the building looks or what it's like to look inside and out, but what are those materials and how can we ensure that the materials we're using on the project are high performance building systems? So these are some of the things that we studied. Could the building be brick? That is an obvious starting point because of all the beautiful brick buildings that we're in now that are right outside. It's definitely a part of Utica. Then thinking about other opportunities as well, like terracotta or precast or metal panel. And for each of these, we're thinking about the way they look and the way they feel and fit into Utica, but also how they perform. We're designing a building that needs to look fantastic on opening day, but it needs to endure in a civic way and actually look great in 20 years. And that's what this next slide is about. It's thinking about each of those different wall type opportunities. Here they're arrayed this way. We've described them. We're rating them in terms of cost, their weight, their performance in terms of how well they keep water out, how well they insulate in terms of energy use and the long-term cost for the building. What's the warranty on each of these systems? What's the cleaning and maintenance schedule? How much will the hospital need to spend on that? And how often do they need to be repaired or replaced? So again, it's a long-term perspective as we're making decisions about the exterior that's going to be ideal for the client, because we want to make sure we're giving them a building that lasts. And then how does that fit into, how do those studies, that matrix, how does that fit into Utica itself? That's the really fun part that we get to talk about next. So here's this amazing site. Here's what this city looked like years ago, and this was a great starting point for us. It's vibrant, and many of these buildings are still here today, and we definitely want to honor them in the way we think about the architecture and design. Here's our site. You can see some of those jewels that are still around, and that's going to influence the way we're thinking about the design for this project. But interestingly, Utica has this past that we want to leverage. It also has a future. It's headed in new directions too. For instance, just less than 4 miles away, you have SUNY Poly. You don't have old-fashioned looking brick buildings there because something cutting edge and state-of-the-art is happening on that campus. And the buildings that are going up over there embody that. So what we're looking for is actually something that can accomplish both. It honors Utica's rich history, and it embraces this future that's innovation-driven. That's a starting point in terms of thinking about the design. Now, often, you could think about an old-fashioned looking building and a very new-looking building and think they have to be mutually exclusive. There's value in both, and what we're looking to do is to find the overlap between the two. In the historical precedents, for instance, this building right here in town, you have great sensitivity to context. You have the brick, it's warm, it has this masonry detail and craft that's really amazing. Here, a much more modern precedent is sending out a different message, but also one that's important for this hospital. It's expressing precision medicine and clinical excellence. It's cooler, it's made of glass and metal. It has this machine-like aesthetic. And again, it's easy to say that these two things are worlds apart, but what we've worked to do is bring them together, find the space that they overlap, and make that a driver for the exterior design. And that's really the goal for the exterior. It needs to respect the rich history of Utica, but then also project a sense of clinical excellence. So people walk up to it and they understand the competence, the care, and the energy that's coming out of the staff and is providing excellent outcomes for them. Here's how we begin to study the old buildings in Utica and learn from them. Here we take one building on a quintessential block, and what can we learn from that building? We can analyze it in terms of the way the glass changes as you move up through the face. You can see that really the registers, the glass and the openings are changing as you get higher and higher. The apertures are actually getting smaller. And what that's doing is providing visual interest for this building. Instead of it being a simple box, it's making it a much more interesting building to look at. That's something that we've borrowed. And then here, Hotel Utica, this has been a near and dear building to our team, actually, and it's actually been something that we've learned a lot from along the way, too. So just as an aside, it's been terrific because our team has stayed at this hotel through the construction, the demolition, and the revitalization of this building. It was actually an honor for us to be there to experience new development in Utica, and then for me as an architect, actually to stay in a building that was so adjacent to the site was incredibly beneficial. We work on projects all over the country and even all over the world. We spend a lot of time visiting sites, but by staying at Hotel Utica, it was different than a site visit. We were actually dwelling on the site. You could understand its textures and its nuance in a totally different way. Open your window in the morning and look out over the site and see that horizon of potential and what Utica could become. It was an amazing experience. So just after a day of meetings, being able to walk out the door and walk the site and really understand its texture and its contours, hugely beneficial for the design team. More formally, we can learn from the building, not just by dwelling in it, but by analyzing it. So you see a very clear base, middle, and top for the project. And there are some logics that are tied into the way this building was designed, and we're borrowing that logic for the design of our building. So you can see clearly there's a zoning that's happening in the way that this is developed. You have the commercial zone at the base, those are very public programs. The ballrooms, they have large vertical windows, it's a civic scale, and it engages the sidewalk, the streetscape. Up above, the windows get smaller, it's a more private program when you get into the guest rooms, it's a domestic scale, and it engages the skyline. So it's responsive to those different zones. That's also something we tried to learn from in this project. And not only those attributes, but then also the material logic for the building changes as you move up too, based on those zones. So at the base, they're using stone. It's a heavier material, and it was perfect for working at grade when you didn't have to lift heavy things very high. Then up higher, they're using brick, an easier material to elevate in order to save money on the construction. So that logic is also something we're borrowing. Here you see our building. It also has a very clear podium and then tower up above. And that's exactly what we've begun to borrow from Hotel Utica, the building across the street, and others in terms of that logic. So podium has public programs, large vertical windows, a civic scale, and just like the other buildings, it engages the streetscape. And then up above you have the tower. It's more personalized, and it's a smaller scale, and it engages the skyline. We also borrowed that material logic that we just showed. So you have the heavier material at the base and the lighter material at the top. So composite metal panel up above, and then the brick at the base. And then working with Turner on this project, the construction management company, we've been able to get real-time pricing from them that compared the price of moving different materials up and down the building, where the materials are deployed, and the cost savings that could be accomplished by using the lighter materials up above and the heavier materials at the base. All of this then turns into the renderings that we'll show now. So we have the logic in place for the design, and we can show you what that actually looks like. So here, the view along Lafayette Street, this is that pedestrian connector that we were talking about earlier. You can see in the corner of each of these images a little key plan. So we're looking toward the east, and the front door is right down here. So we're in the pedestrian connection. You can see the bed tower rising up above and the podium here. And then we've walked closer to the front door. Here's the entry canopy. It's covering one lane and even the passenger doors for a second lane of drop-off. There's a third lane too that allows cars to bypass and make sure that the traffic flow through that whole space is not congested. And then you see the tower rising up above. The vertical window idea that we borrowed from the buildings here in town, engaging the streetscape, and then something a little bit different, lighter feeling and engaging the skyline with the tower up above. Here we've swung around. We're also looking toward the front door, which is right here, but we're looking more from Broadway. You're getting another view of the tower itself, and then we can again walk closer to the front door and see entry canopy and tower up above. Now we've come over to the Columbia side of the building. We're looking at the bridge that crosses from the materials management and utility building, crosses Columbia and over into our tower. Here's our podium and the tower up above, all the bed floors you see rising there. Lots of opportunities for signage at the top of this building. Again, communicating the presence of this hospital in the city. And then the last thing we'll say about this slide, you may have noticed on all of these more narrow end walls, there's an architectural move that brings a more narrow band of metal panel up. And again, learning from the buildings here in Utica, we call this the stitch, actually, but stone base, brick tower, and then stone top, and then a little bit of stone on the edges that really ties the bottom and top together. It's easy to think of a podium and a bed tower as having a clumsy relationship where one is just sitting on top of the other. Here we've worked to create this kind of interlock so that they feel like they're tied together. And we're doing that with the stitch here, which is a warmer metal panel that's tied into the same color as the podium. And then we're also bringing some of this down into the podium so it engages and really feels like they're interlocked. It's a cohesive, singular system rather than something that feels foreign or alien. Now we pull back just a little bit farther. How does the building fit into the skyline, that regional gateway view? We can see a couple of points for reference, the Aud, the project site, and Kennedy Plaza, and then we can do this rendering in a way that shows the building in relationship to those other landmarks and gives you an idea for its height and the way it is situated within the skyline. So Kennedy Plaza and the Aud, this is really coming right off of the off-ramp, and you get an idea for the way the building looks and feels. Again, working to complement the other buildings on the skyline rather than overshadow them. And then lastly, we come back to this diagram. Here we were talking about old and new and borrowing from each. We don't want to forget something really important that's also happening on this site, the Mohawk River Valley, and the proximity of this building and this site to this amazing natural resource and that park-like setting. So how can we learn from this and apply it to the building as well? And here are a couple of the attributes that we're working. It really is things we heard directly from the community that we're rolling into this design. Careful consideration for the campus lighting, security, parking, and pedestrian walkways. Designing for walkability. Shaping the towers so that you have views to the north and south, either to the hills to the north or the skyline to the south. And then incorporating park-like areas. And if we go back to this last rendering, the Lafayette Promenade, we've gotten a little higher here, and you see the way that works in between the garage, the structured parking on this side, and the building. And this is our opportunity, one of our great opportunities for that park-like setting. Thinking about what it's going to be like to walk along that space, the benches that are being provided there, the trees, the warmth of the landscape, and even conversations beginning now about how to set up an educational program along that walk that celebrates the history of the city and the site itself. The trail, the canal, there's a lot that happened here in the past, and we can create a park that references that. That's something we're very excited about moving forward. So that's the set. Hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully you see in this set that we really have worked to combine old and new, something that honors that rich history, but then also is forward-facing and projecting clinical excellence.
Great job, Ryan. Thank you. So as we have spent years working on this project up to this point, I think this now provides everyone in this room, in the community, a little more definition of what this project's all about. And I think that goes a long way in making this project go a little further down the road. Again, we're less than a year away from groundbreaking and start watching the steel rise. That concludes our program.